Welcome back to the next episode of Sacred Histories with me, Joy. Today we will be starting a new mini-series looking at different personalities. Saint Sebastian was a Roman soldier, young, striking, and courageous, serving under Emperor Diocletian in the late 3rd century CE. Though he wore the armor of the Imperial Guard, he carried in his heart a different allegiance. In secret, Sebastian was a Christian. When fellow believers were sentenced to death, he visited them in prison, comforting the condemned and strengthening their faith. According to Butler's Lives of the Saints, Sebastian's dual identity, as soldier and secret disciple, embodied the early church's tension between loyalty to empire and loyalty to God. Eventually, Diocletian discovered Sebastian's faith. Outraged that one of his most trusted officers had defied him, the emperor ordered that Sebastian be executed, shot full of arrows by his own comrades. Left for dead, Sebastian miraculously survived. Nursed back to health by the Christian widow Irene, he returned not to hide but to confront the emperor once more, boldly denouncing the persecution of Christians. This time he was clubbed to death, his body thrown into Rome's sewers, later recovered and buried in the catacombs, where his tomb soon became a pilgrimage site. What is significant about his martyrdom in particular? Sebastian's story is more than the account of a martyr. It is the dramatization of defiant faith within the heart of the empire. In medieval and Renaissance Europe, he became a symbol of spiritual beauty through suffering. Artists like Andrea Mantegna and Guido Reni portrayed him as a radiant youth whose serene face transcended pain, a visual metaphor for divine grace piercing through human flesh. Butler writes that Sebastian stood as a pillar of fortitude, a soldier not of Caesar but of Christ. During outbreaks of plague, he was invoked as a protector, perhaps because arrows, symbols of divine wrath, were reimagined as the darts of disease. To pray to Sebastian was to seek healing, courage, and endurance. Even today, statues of the saint adorn churches across Italy, Spain, and Latin America. Carried in processions, blend Christian devotion with local cultural identity. For nearly 2 millennia, Saint Sebastian has embodied the paradox of vulnerability and strength. He represents the Christian conviction that body can be wounded, yet still testify to an unbreakable spirit. His cult offered believers a sense of solidarity. Just as Sebastian survived his first execution, so too could the faithful endure persecution, illness, or despair. Modern devotees continue to find inspiration in him, not only as a patron of soldiers and plague victims, but also as a saint of resilience and hidden faith. In some communities, especially within the LGBTQ+ community regarding spirituality, Sebastian's image has become a symbol of suffering transformed into beauty, body, both persecuted and sanctified. However, as always, what if we take a more critical lens at Saint Sebastian's story? In the myth of persecution, Moss argues that many martyrdom stories were shaped less by eyewitness testimony than by theological imagination. When we apply that lens to Sebastian, the seams begin to show. First, there are no contemporary Roman records of a soldier named Sebastian executed for Christianity. The earliest detailed narratives surface in the Sancta Sanctorum, likely composed in the 4th or 5th century, long after Diocletian's reign. The miraculous survival from the arrows, the secret life of a soldier saint, and the dramatic second confrontation with the emperor all bear the hallmarks of hagiographic artistry rather than reportage. Moss would suggest that Sebastian's story served as a moral allegory for Christians living under threat. It's not literal history but theological theater. The arrows became symbols of worldly suffering, his survival the triumph of faith over empire, his beauty a metaphor for sanctified endurance. To medieval audiences, verisimilitude mattered less than meaning. The story's power to stir courage, devotion, and moral clarity. So while modern historians might doubt that Sebastian ever stood before Diocletian, they can still recognize how his legend gave voice to a persecuted community's deepest hope, that truth cannot be killed and that love, however wounded, will rise again. Saint Sebastian stands at the crossroads of myth and memory, body and spirit, empire and eternity. Whether he lived exactly as Butler describes or as Moss reinterprets, his story continues to resonate because it speaks to something universal, the human longing to make suffering meaningful. The arrows of the world may pierce the flesh, but not the soul that loves. Thank you for watching the first episode of this mini-series, Sacred Personalities, and hopefully you can join me in the next episode as well for Sacred Histories with me, Joy.